A regime can disappear in a single night, but the people born inside it do not disappear with it. In October 2000, as crowds stormed government buildings in Belgrade and Slobodan Milošević's 13-year rule finally collapsed, two people connected to him vanished from public view. His children. One left for Russia. The other disappeared into Montenegro. For years, their names seemed to survive only in old newspaper archives, court documents, photographs from another era, and stories about a family that had once stood at the center of Yugoslav power. Then, more than 2 decades later, one of them suddenly appeared again. Not in Belgrade. Not in a courtroom. Not in exile pleading for forgiveness. In Moscow. Standing at the unveiling of a monument to his father. And the words he spoke raised a question far larger than the whereabouts of one missing political family. What happens to the children of a ruler when the country their parents controlled no longer exists in the same form? What happens when a family name becomes both a passport and a burden? And after all the wars, accusations, arrests, exile and death, where exactly did Slobodan Milošević's children end up? The answer is stranger than the silence surrounding them suggests. Slobodan Milošević was not born into a royal dynasty. He was born in Požarevac, Serbia in 1941, into a family shaped by Yugoslavia's political and religious divisions. He studied law at the University of Belgrade and entered the world of communist-era management and banking before moving into politics. In 1965 he married his childhood friend Mirjana Marković. Together they had 2 children. Their daughter Marija was born in 1965. Their son Marko followed in 1974. At first, there was nothing about the family that suggested the extraordinary fate waiting for them. But their father was climbing. And in the Yugoslavia of the 1980s, political power was becoming something much more dangerous than a career. Milošević rose rapidly through the Communist Party structure. By the late 1980s, he had transformed himself from a party bureaucrat into Serbia's dominant political figure. In 1989 he became president of Serbia. The following year, his political machine was reorganized into the Socialist Party of Serbia. And while Milošević increasingly became the public face of Serbian power, his wife, Mirjana Marković, developed her own political influence. Their children were growing up inside a world most people could only see from the outside. Security guards, political connections, power, money, and an extraordinary sense that the rules governing ordinary people did not necessarily apply to them. Their private lives were becoming inseparable from their father's public position. And then Yugoslavia began to collapse. The country that had held together different republics, ethnic communities, political traditions, and historical grievances began breaking apart. Slovenia and Croatia declared independence in 1991. Bosnia and Herzegovina followed. Wars erupted. The name Milošević became internationally associated with the violent breakup of Yugoslavia and with the policies of the Serbian leadership during the conflicts. The family, meanwhile, remained at the center of Serbian political life. But it was Marko, not Marija, who became one of the most controversial figures surrounding the regime. By the 1990s, Marko Milošević had accumulated businesses and a reputation for extraordinary wealth. He became associated with enterprises in Požarevac, including the Madonna nightclub and other commercial interests. Opponents and later investigators also connected him to allegations of smuggling and organized crime. Those allegations became part of the mythology surrounding the Milošević family. But this is where the historical record requires caution. Claims about Marko's criminal activities were widespread, and Serbian authorities later pursued cases against him. Yet not every allegation became a conviction. In one highly publicized case, Marko was accused of involvement in the beating of 3 members of the opposition movement Otpor in 2000. He was tried in absentia after fleeing Serbia. In 2008, a Serbian court acquitted him, saying the evidence did not establish who had caused the injuries or that Marko had intended to inflict the serious injuries alleged. That distinction matters. Because the story of the Milošević children has often been told as if every accusation were automatically a proven fact. The historical record is more complicated. And then came the year that changed everything. 2000. By this point, Slobodan Milošević had survived international isolation, sanctions, war, political pressure, and years of opposition. But he was finally facing something he could not simply control from inside the state. An election. Milošević challenged Vojislav Koštunica in the September 2000 Yugoslav presidential election. The opposition declared that Milošević had lost. Milošević disputed the result. The country began to boil. On October 5, hundreds of thousands of demonstrators filled Belgrade. government buildings were stormed. The political system that had appeared immovable only months earlier began collapsing in hours. And suddenly, the Milošević family was no longer a ruling family. It was a family trying to survive the aftermath of its own fall. That distinction would define everything that came next. Marko fled Serbia. His businesses and properties became targets amid the chaos. Contemporary reports described him leaving for Moscow with his wife and young son. Russia would become the destination that repeatedly appeared in the family's future. But Marko's journey out of Serbia was not completely straightforward. He reportedly attempted to continue onward to China but was sent back to Russia after Russian authorities found problems with his passport. Eventually, Russia became more than a temporary hiding place. It became the country in which Marko's family found legal protection. In 2006, Russian authorities confirmed that Mirjana Marković and her son Marko had been granted refugee status in Russia. Both were wanted by Serbian authorities at the time. Marko had left Serbia after his father's overthrow. His mother followed later. And the family that had once lived at the center of Belgrade's political universe was now living under the protection of another state. But Maria's story was different. She did not simply follow her brother into the Russian exile. Her relationship with her family had already become complicated. Maria had been involved in the family's media world. She was associated with TV Kosova, a station established during the final years of her father's rule. And unlike her brother, she would eventually establish her life in Montenegro. But before she disappeared into that quieter existence, she became part of one of the most dramatic nights in the Milošević family story. April 1, 2001. Slobodan Milošević was surrounded inside his residence in Belgrade. The new authorities wanted him arrested. For roughly 40 hours, the standoff had created the possibility of bloodshed. Then, as police moved to take him into custody, shots were heard. Serbian officials said the shots came from Marija Milošević. She was accused of firing a weapon during the confrontation. No one was reported injured in the shooting. Her father was arrested. And the daughter of the man who had dominated Serbian politics was suddenly facing a criminal case of her own. The symbolism was almost impossible to miss. For years, the Milošević name had been associated with state power. Now that same name was appearing in arrest records. Maria was later charged over the firearm incident and other related offenses. She failed to appear for later proceedings and an arrest warrant was issued. But she was already leaving the political world that had defined her family. Montenegro became her refuge. By the mid-2000s, reports identified her as living in Nikšić. She remained largely absent from public life while the Serbian authorities continued their efforts to bring her before a court. And while the children were disappearing in different directions, their father was being transported to The Hague. The man who had dominated Serbia was now sitting inside a detention unit belonging to the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. His trial began in 2002. The indictment covered allegations connected to Croatia, Bosnia and Kosovo, including crimes against humanity, grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions, and violations of the laws or customs of war. But the trial would never reach a verdict. That detail is crucial. Slobodan Milošević was never convicted or acquitted by the tribunal because he died before the proceedings were completed. On March 11, 2006, he was found dead in his cell at the United Nations detention unit in The Hague. The tribunal's proceedings were formally closed 3 days later. Subsequent Dutch and tribunal investigations concluded that he died of natural causes, from a heart attack, and found no evidence that he had been poisoned, murdered, or had committed suicide. And that created another strange chapter in the family story. The father was dead. The mother was in Russia. The son was in Russia. The daughter was in Montenegro. The political empire was gone. But the family itself had not disappeared. In fact, the most revealing part of the story was only beginning. Marko remained the most mysterious. For years, reliable public information about his life became remarkably scarce. He had left Serbia. He had obtained refugee status in Russia. He had been tried in absentia in Serbia. And then he seemed to disappear. That silence lasted for years. There were occasional reports, but nothing that resembled the visibility he had enjoyed during his father's rule. The man who once appeared beside businesses, bodyguards, nightlife and political power was now almost invisible. Then came June 2023. Moscow. A monument dedicated to Slobodan Milošević was unveiled. And suddenly, after more than 20 years away from the public spotlight, Marko Milošević appeared. The sight was startling precisely because it was so unexpected. He was no longer the young man remembered from the 1990s. He was older. and he was standing in Russia beside supporters of his father. Marko was seen alongside Alexander Zaldistanov, leader of the Night Wolves motorcycle organization, a figure known for his close ties to Vladimir Putin. The appearance represented the clearest public glimpse of Marko in years. But Marko did not appear simply to remain silent. He spoke. And what he said revealed something about how he viewed the collapse of Yugoslavia and his father's legacy. He compared the Yugoslav wars with the war in Ukraine and described the Yugoslav crisis as a kind of earlier test. The statement was political. It was also deeply personal. Because Marko was no longer merely the son of a controversial former leader. He was a surviving member of the family that had experienced the collapse of Yugoslavia from inside the highest circles of power. And yet, even after that appearance, much of Marko's private life remained unknown. That is an important distinction when answering the question of where he is today. There is strong public evidence placing him in Russia and, most significantly, in Moscow in 2023. But there is not a reliable public record that allows us to map his day-to-day life in 2026 with confidence. He has deliberately maintained a low profile. So the honest answer is not that Marko Milošević has completely vanished. It is that he has largely chosen not to be seen. And that may be the most revealing fact of all. Because for a man born into political visibility, disappearance can become a form of survival. His sister Marija took another route. She remained in Montenegro. For more than 2 decades, she was largely absent from the public eye. Then, in September 2021, photographs emerged of Marija in Cetinje. The images were notable precisely because she had spent so many years away from the spotlight. Reports at the time said she had been living in Montenegro for more than 20 years. They also reported that a Serbian court had ended the domestic detention measures connected with her case and asked Interpol to withdraw an international warrant. But even here, caution is necessary. A photograph in 2021 does not tell us everything about her life in 2026. There is no credible evidence that she returned to politics in any major public role. There is no reliable modern record showing her trying to rebuild the Milošević political machine. Instead, the public trail becomes faint again. And that silence is striking. Because Marija had once been far from anonymous. She had been the daughter of one of the most powerful men in the Balkans. She had been connected to a television station. She had stood inside the family residence during the dramatic arrest of her father. She had publicly defended him after his death. She had even expressed strong views about where he should be buried. Yet eventually, she chose something very different from the life her father had lived. Distance. Privacy. Montenegro. The contrast between the two siblings is almost cinematic. Marko disappeared into Russia and later reappeared there beside a monument to his father. Marija built a quieter life in Montenegro and was photographed only rarely. One remained connected, at least publicly, to the political memory of Slobodan Milošević. The other seemed to step away from it. But there was another family member whose fate shaped both stories. Their mother, Mirjana Marković. 4 years, she remained an ideological force in the background of the Milošević system. She founded the Yugoslav United Left, known as JUL, and became one of the most influential political figures around her husband. After the regime collapsed, she left Serbia and eventually lived in Russia. Her son Marko was already there. And for years, mother and son remained linked by exile. Then, in 2019, Mirjana Marković died in Russia. With her death, another part of the Milošević family's political generation disappeared. Slobodan was gone. Mirjana was gone. The Yugoslavia they had once ruled over was gone. And the children remained. This is where the story becomes more complicated than a simple tale of descendants carrying on a dynasty. Because there was no dynasty. There was no throne. No constitutional succession. No hereditary office waiting for Marko or Marija. Their father's political system had collapsed precisely because the country was changing faster than the family could control it. What remained was a surname. And that surname carried enormous weight. For some people, Milošević represented Serbian nationalism and resistance to foreign pressure. For others, his name represented authoritarianism, war, repression, and the catastrophe of Yugoslavia's violent breakup. For historians, the record is more complicated still. But for his children, there was no possibility of treating the name as merely historical. It was their family. That may explain why their public lives after 2000 became so difficult to read. Marko did not emerge as the successor to his father. Marija did not build a political dynasty. Neither returned to anything resembling the world they had known in the 1990s. Instead, both became private figures living in the shadow of a public surname. And there is an extraordinary irony here. The man who spent years fighting to control how history would remember him ultimately lost control of the story. His trial ended without a verdict because he died before the judges could complete it. His country changed. His political movement survived in altered forms, but his personal rule did not. His wife died in exile. His son became a rare public figure in Russia. His daughter remained in Montenegro, mostly outside public life. And the family that once seemed inseparable from the Serbian state became geographically scattered across the Balkans and Russia. Yet the story contains one final twist. The Milošević family did not disappear in the way people often assume fallen political families disappear. There was no final exile photograph showing everyone walking toward an airport. No final royal funeral. No successor announcing that the family name would continue. Instead, the family dissolved into ordinary geography. Moscow, Montenegro, Serbia. A handful of appearances, a handful of court documents, a handful of photographs, and an enormous silence between them. As of the latest reliable public evidence, Marko Milošević has been publicly documented in Moscow, most notably at the June 2023 unveiling of a monument to his father. Beyond such appearances, his current private life is not well documented in reputable public sources. Marija Milošević was publicly reported as living in Montenegro for more than 2 decades, and she was photographed in Cetinje in 2021. Her present private circumstances are similarly difficult to verify from reliable public reporting. So if the question is simply, where are Slobodan Milošević's children today? The answer is surprisingly quiet. Marko is associated with Russia, where he received refugee status and where he reappeared publicly in Moscow in 2023. Marija has been associated with Montenegro, where she has lived largely outside public view. Neither became the political heir of their father. Neither recreated his regime. Neither inherited the state power that once surrounded the family. And perhaps that is the strangest ending available to a story that began with so much power. Slobodan Milošević spent his political life trying to shape the future of a country that was already beginning to fracture. His children grew up inside that struggle. Then the system collapsed. The father went to The Hague. The mother went into exile. The son went to Russia. The daughter went to Montenegro. And eventually, the family became something history rarely allows powerful families to become: private. The name Milošević still carries political arguments. It still provokes anger. It still evokes memories of war, nationalism, sanctions, NATO bombing, political repression, and the disintegration of Yugoslavia. But the children themselves are no longer standing at the center of those events. They are survivors of a political world that no longer exists. And that may be the deepest irony. The Milošević family once lived as though power could protect them from history. But history eventually reached them anyway. Not with a single dramatic ending. With distance. With exile. With court files. With death. With silence. And with 2 children forced to live long after the man whose name defined their childhood was gone. The empire disappeared. The palace became a museum. The crown was lost. But somewhere in the world, ordinary people still carry the blood of the man who once ruled millions.